parents didn't help me pay for my education, so I worked hard at 2 jobs while they gave my brother a new car for birthday. I got angry and told them who they really were. I always wanted to be a lawyer. Maybe it was because I grew up watching courtroom dramas. Or maybe it was the way people would light up when I argued my point and backed it up with facts. My parents loved that about me at first. They used to brag that their son was going to be the first lawyer in the family. When I got into a good pre-law program at a university not too far from home, they threw a little dinner party. Nothing big, but enough to show me off to a few neighbors and relatives. I remember my mother telling people how proud she was and how my determination inspired my younger brother, Charles, who was still in high school. But somewhere along the way, her support changed. At first it was small things. My father stopped asking how my classes were going. My mother hesitated when I mentioned books or supplies I needed. Then one semester, out of nowhere, they told me they couldn't help me pay for school anymore. "We have to think about Charles," my father said casually, as if that explained everything. I remember sitting there stunned. My tuition wasn't outrageous, and I wasn't asking for full support. But they said they had to focus on my brother. He was 17 at the time and a year away from graduation. It made no sense. They didn't say they couldn't afford to help. They said they wouldn't. "You're an adult now," my mother added. "You need to learn to take care of your own life." And that was that. No discussion, no compromise. Just a shrug of the shoulders and a closed door. I had no choice but to figure it out. I got a construction job during the day and started working part-time at McDonald's at night. It was exhausting, but I wasn't going to give up. I'd made it this far, and I wasn't going to let their sudden indifference derail my plans. Still, it stung. Every time I dragged myself home after a double shift, covered in sweat and grease, I wondered what had changed. Why was everything suddenly about Charles? I hadn't told anyone, not my friends, not my professors, not even my uncle, who was close to me. I kept my head down and carried on, thinking that maybe, just maybe, they'd see how hard I was trying and offer some kind of help. But instead, they surprised me in ways I wasn't prepared for. About a year after they cut me off, Charles turned 18. I was so busy with work and school that I hadn't paid much attention to what was going on at home, but I couldn't miss the build-up to his birthday. It was like a full-scale production. They hired a caterer, put up decorations all over the house, and invited what seemed like half the neighborhood. I didn't even get a heads up. I found out when I got home from work the night before and saw them unloading boxes of supplies. The day of the party, I was already upset. I barely slept after working a late shift at McDonald's, and I had a ton of reading to do for one of my classes. But when I saw what was waiting in the driveway, my irritation turned into something darker. Parked there, with a giant red ribbon on top, was a brand new car. And not just any car, a sleek, shiny SUV that probably cost more than my entire tuition. "Surprise!" I heard my mom yell as I walked past the living room, where Charles was sitting with a goofy grin, surrounded by friends and family. I couldn't believe it. They wouldn't even help me out with a few $100s for books, but they could drop tens of thousands of dollars on a car for Charles? I tried to shake it off. I didn't want to ruin the party, so I grabbed a soda from the fridge and slipped out the back door, pretending I needed some fresh air. But the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about how unfair it was. Later that evening, I came back inside to get my keys and go for a drive, just to clear my head. As I walked through the house, I heard my parents talking about how proud they were of Charles. How he deserved this car because he was such a good boy and had such a bright future ahead of him. I gritted my teeth and kept walking. I came home late that night, long after the party was over. The car was still in the driveway, gleaming under the porch light like a monument to favoritism. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and stared at the ceiling for what seemed like hours. Something inside me was starting to crack, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold it together. The day after the party, the house was still a mess, with balloons deflated on the floor and leftover food containers stacked on the counter. My parents were in the kitchen talking as if they were still on a high from the night before. Charles was outside polishing his new car, making sure it looked as perfect as the day he got it. I tried to keep my head down and not think about it. I had a construction shift to get to and some reading to do later, so I made myself some breakfast and tried to focus on the day ahead. But as I sat there, I couldn't help but overhear my parents' conversation. "He's so lucky," my mother said with a smile. "This car is going to make his life so much easier." My dad nodded. "He's a good kid. He deserves it. He's got such a bright future ahead of him." I stared at my plate, my appetite gone. They said it so casually, like it was just a fact. Charles deserved everything and I didn't. A few hours later, as I laced up my work boots in the hallway, Charles walked in. He was grinning, holding the keys to his new car like a trophy. "Man, yesterday was awesome," he said. "You should have stayed. Everyone was excited about the car." "Yeah, I saw it," I said. "Are you jealous?" He laughed, but the way he said it rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't answer. I just grabbed my bag and went to work. I couldn't stop thinking about it that day. Every swing of the hammer and flip of the French fry felt heavier than usual, weighed down by anger I didn't know how to let go of. I had tried so hard working, studying, barely sleeping, and it didn't seem to matter. They hadn't even asked how I was doing in months, yet they had no problem throwing Charles a huge party and buying him a car that cost more than my entire year's tuition. By the time I got home, it was late, after midnight. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. My parents were still up, sitting at the table, drinking coffee and talking quietly. I walked in, intending to grab some water and go straight to bed, but when my mom looked up and smiled, I felt something inside me crack. "Oh, you're back," she said. "We were just saying how proud we are of Charles. He's so lucky to have such a bright future." I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Lucky?" I said. "You call him lucky? You gave him a brand new car and threw him a huge party, but when I needed help, you told me to find it myself. How is that fair?" My dad frowned. "What's your problem? This has nothing to do with you." "Nothing to do with me?" I said. "I'm working 2 jobs and barely sleeping to stay in school because you refuse to help me. But you spend tens of thousands of dollars on Charles like it's nothing. Do you even care how that makes me feel?" My mother looked at me like I was being dramatic. "Charles is younger. He needs more support. You're older and doing fine on your own. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" I felt my anger boiling over. "Doing fine? Do you even know what my life is like right now? I'm killing myself trying to keep up with everything, and you can't even acknowledge it. Meanwhile, you give Charles everything he could ever want and act like he's the golden child." Charles walked into the kitchen just then. He must have heard everything, but instead of saying anything helpful, he just grinned. "Hey, if you're upset, I can give you a ride in my new car. Maybe it'll cheer you up." I stared at him, speechless. I couldn't believe how dismissive he was, how little any of this seemed to matter to him or her. I didn't say another word. I just turned around, went to my room, and started packing my things. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I barely slept that night. My mind was racing with all the things I wanted to say but didn't. When the sun came up, my bag was packed and sitting by the door. When I walked into the kitchen that morning, Charles was there, eating cereal as if nothing had happened. My parents were sitting at the table, scrolling through their phones, looking perfectly content. "You're up early," my mother said without looking up. "I'm leaving," I said. That got their attention. My dad put his phone down and gave me a quizzical look. "What do you mean, leaving?" "I'm done," I said. "I'm not going to stay in a house that treats me like I don't matter." My mother sighed as if I was being dramatic. "Don't be ridiculous. Where are you going to go anyway?" "To Uncle Rick's," I said. He'd always told me I could stay with him if I ever needed to. I'd never taken him up on it before, but now I didn't see any other option. "Uncle Rick?" My dad scoffed. "You think he's going to put up with this attitude? Better than staying here," I said. Charles leaned back in his chair, still smirking. Well, if you need a ride, you know where my car is. My mom chuckled at that, and even my dad grinned. It was as if they didn't take me seriously at all. That was when I snapped. You know what? I said, my voice shaking. You two are the most selfish, narcissistic people I've ever met. You act like I'm an afterthought, like I don't deserve anything because I'm older. You keep saying that Charles needs more support, but what about me? When did I stop being your child? They didn't say anything, so I continued. Do you even know what my life is like? I'm working 2 jobs, living on scraps, barely scraping by so I can finish school. And you never once asked if I was okay. Instead, you spend all your time and money on Charles, like he's the only one who matters. My dad finally spoke up. You're being overdramatic. Life isn't fair. You need to get over it. Get over it? I said. You made it impossible for me to succeed, and now you're telling me to get over it? You're not parents, you're just playing favorites and pretending this is normal. My mother shook her head. You're acting like a child. We've given you everything you need to succeed. If you're struggling, that's on you. I laughed bitterly. You've given me nothing but reasons to resent you. And you know what? One day when you need help, don't expect me to be there. Because I'm done with this family. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Charles called from the kitchen. Hey, seriously, you want a ride? I'll even let you pick the music. I didn't even look back. No thanks. I'll take care of myself. Like always. But just as I reached the door, something unexpected happened. My dad stood up. For a second, I thought maybe he'd finally realize how wrong they'd been. But instead, he walked over to Charles, patted him on the back, and said, You're lucky your brother's leaving. Now we don't have to deal with his drama anymore. It hit me like a punch in the gut, but it also reinforced what I already knew. I was done with them. I left without another word and drove to Uncle Rick's. When I told him everything, he didn't even hesitate. He hugged me and said, You have a place to stay here as long as you need it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone really cared about me. And that was worth more than any car or party they could have thrown. Staying with Uncle Rick felt like a breath of fresh air after everything I'd been through. He lived in a modest house a few towns over, far enough from my parents that I didn't have to worry about running into them. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like home, a real home, where I wasn't constantly reminded that I didn't measure up to someone else. Rick had always been the easygoing uncle growing up, the one who'd let me sneak an extra soda at family gatherings or teach me how to fix a leaky faucet. He didn't ask for much, and he didn't pry into my life when I showed up on his doorstep with a bag and a lot of anger. Stay as long as you need to, he said. We'll figure it out. For the first few weeks, I kept my head down. I worked my construction shifts, went to class, and spent my nights at the small desk Rick had set up for me in the guest room. I didn't talk much about my parents or Charles. Frankly, I didn't want to think about them. But Rick was observant. One night at dinner he asked, So what really happened? Why'd you leave? I hesitated, but finally I told him everything: the favoritism, the car, the party, the constant dismissal of my efforts, and finally the moment when my father made it clear that he didn't care if I walked out of their lives. Rick didn't interrupt. He just nodded and listened, his expression hard to read. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, You know, that's not how family should treat you. It's not right. I nodded, but it felt good to hear someone else say it. A few days later, Rick did something I never expected him to do. He pulled out a checkbook and handed me a check for a few $1,000s. What's this? I asked, staring at it in shock. It's for school, he said. I know you're busting your ass to get there, but you shouldn't have to kill yourself over it. Take this, quit one of your jobs, and focus on what matters. I didn't know what to say. I'd felt like I had to do everything on my own for so long that accepting help felt strange. But Rick didn't make a big deal out of it. He just shrugged and said, If you really want to pay me back someday, you can. But for now, just take it. So I did. I quit McDonald's the next week, and for the first time in a year, I felt like I could breathe. I still worked construction during the day, but my evenings were free to focus on school and occasionally just relax. Uncle Rick became my biggest supporter. He'd ask about my classes, help me practice for mock trials, and even sit through lengthy explanations of case law. He didn't have kids or a wife, so I think having someone around gave him a sense of purpose. And honestly, it gave me a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't perfect. I still felt the sting of what my parents had done, and there were times when I wondered if they ever thought about me. But life at Rick's house was stable, and for the first time I felt like I was actually building something for myself. Then one day something surprising happened. My mom called. When my phone rang and I saw my mom's name on the screen, I froze. It had been months since I'd spoken to her. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part, the part that still craved some kind of acknowledgement, couldn't resist. I replied with a hesitant, "Hello?" "Hi," she said, her voice softer than I had expected. "How are you?" I wasn't sure how to answer. The last time we'd spoken, she'd practically laughed me out of the house. Now here she was, acting like everything was fine. "I'm fine," I said carefully. "How about you?" "We're fine," she said quickly. Then, after a pause, "We were just wondering how things were going with school and life." It felt strange, like she was testing the waters to see if I was still angry. "School's fine," I said. "Work is busy, but manageable." "Oh, good," she said. "Your dad and I were talking the other day, and we realized that we hadn't really checked in on you. We figured you were busy, but—" She trailed off, and I could tell there was more she wasn't saying. "Why now?" I asked, not accusing, but genuinely curious. There was a pause before she answered. "Well, Charles mentioned that you'd left, and we didn't think you'd actually stay away that long. We were worried." I almost laughed. Worried? They hadn't seemed worried when I walked out the door. But something in their tone stopped me. Maybe it wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest I'd gotten from them in years. We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about superficial things, my classes, how Charles was doing, how my dad's work was going. It wasn't much, but it felt like a beginning. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking. Part of me wanted to let it go, to let her back in and pretend the past year hadn't happened. But another part of me was still angry, still hurt. When I told Rick about the phone call, he nodded thoughtfully. "People don't change overnight," he said. "But it sounds like they're trying. Whether you give them another chance is up to you." I wasn't ready to make that decision. Over the next few weeks, my parents called more often. My dad even reached out once, which was rare. The conversations were awkward at first, but they became more natural. They'd ask about my classes, and I'd ask how things were at home. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Still, I didn't go back. I stayed with Rick, who seemed perfectly happy to have me around. He even joked one night, "You're better company than the dog I was thinking about getting." I laughed, but deep down I knew I'd be forever grateful to him. Rick hadn't just given me a place to stay, he'd given me a chance to catch my breath, to rebuild my life on my own terms. Then, out of the blue, my dad invited me over for dinner. "Just to catch up," he said. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I said yes. After all, maybe it was time to see if things had really changed. Dinner at my parents' house was awkward but polite. They asked about school and work, and I answered, keeping things polite but distant. Toward the end, my father cleared his throat and said, "We've been thinking about what you said. You were right, we haven't been fair to you." My mother added, "We want to make it up to you. If you need anything, money, a place to stay, we are here for you." It felt sincere, and I appreciated it, but I had already made my decision. "Thanks," I said, "but I'm fine. Uncle Rick has been incredible. I'm happy there, and I've built a life that works for me." They looked disappointed, but didn't argue. My mother said quietly, "We understand. I stayed with Uncle Rick, and life with him was simple but meaningful. We went fishing on the weekends, something I never thought I'd enjoy, but it became our thing. He taught me how to cast a line and cook a perfect fish, and we talked for hours on the water. Rick wasn't just my uncle, he became the father figure I didn't know I needed. With his support, I graduated on time and went to law school. I was still working part-time, but his help gave me the breathing room I needed to focus on my studies. My parents and Charles began to check in more often, and while I appreciated the effort, I kept a certain distance. My home, my real family, was with Rick. When I graduated from law school, Rick was the first person I called. I made it, I told him. He laughed. Of course you did. I never doubted you for a second. I never moved back home, but I didn't hold a grudge. My parents and I found a balance, but my life with Rick was where I truly belong. Family, I realized, wasn't about who raised you, it was about who stood by you when it mattered most.